And put it on. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's CX Quick Tips. Of course, it's going to be a good one because I have Lauren Volpe on with me. Lauren, welcome.
Hi, everybody. So glad to be here. Happy summer.
Oh, yeah. Happy summer. Yes. And we're going to talk about getting into a peak season, at least when we should say summer, Northern Hemisphere, North America. You know, some of you may have a different season that you're dealing with depending on where you're watching this. But Lauren is the Chief Experience Officer with QuadPay. And I love having her on these CX Quick Tips for a multitude of reasons. One being is just her wealth and experience and her spirit, and then also she is, as they say, in the trenches, really trying to help their organization and their customers be, the most successful that they can possibly be. And so we were talking about this year and peak season being quite different than it's been in the years past. And Lauren and I were even talking about some other things associated with staffing and, how we can properly manage that, because at all levels of an organization, I think people have a different commitment to vacation than they've ever had in the past. So how do we manage all that? So Lauren, I think, you bring up a good point, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but what is the best place for us to start when we start talking about planning for peak season 2021?
Well, the first thing I'm doing, which I am currently doing with my team, is I am looking at what happened last year to see if I can see any patterns or any mistakes, anything that happened that we didn't predict or anticipate. And then, of course, I will start with a survey. I think it's critical to survey our existing agents to see how they're doing, any stresses that are going on. Do more of this, do less of this, and really make sure that our base agents are in good shape. I think that's critical to really circle the wagons, make sure that they're feeling cared for. They've been through an awful lot in the past year, especially in the Philippines, between lockdown, then bringing everybody back on site, and then everybody has to go back home. So now they're all working remote again. And so we're working very closely with our BPO partner to ensure that our agents are feeling safe. They know where they're going to be working, whether it's on site or working from home, and that they have all the proper equipment, because things are different during ramp season. The volume is much higher. And so we need to be sure that they have the proper equipment as well.
Well, I mean, gosh, when you were talking about the dynamic that you have to manage, everything from the outsource relationship to offshore to I'm sure you have different tiers, of support that, probably bring some of those contacts back, to your site or location, or at least, closer to home. And you start looking at, the seesaw and the mental aspects. You talk about also the training element. So if I'm thinking about ramp and I'm thinking about all these moving dynamics, how I used to train probably isn't how I need to train now. So what are you doing when you start thinking about training, these seasonal workers, your foundational workers? What are you looking at doing?
So a couple of things. First, what we've done is we've gone back and looked at our actual training curriculum to see if there's a way to split it in half. So instead of it being 2 solid weeks, maybe do 1 week and then a couple of weeks in production, come back in, and then you get the harder stuff taught to you. We're going to definitely trial that with the next 2 batches of agents that are coming in. And that way, by the end of August, I'll have an idea. Do I want to stick with the 2 solid weeks? Understanding speed to efficiency is 6 weeks. Or do I want to go with this experiment, which we don't know what the speed to efficiency is, but we suspect it's 4 weeks because it's bite size. It's easier to digest when it's just not, 2 solid weeks. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the results of that experiment are, and then we'll form our plan for starting September 1st. That's when it hits.
Be here before you know it, as they say. Okay, so when you start talking about testing, give us a little bit of an insight into how you go about the testing. Because let me give you an example. Some may say, okay, we did this last year and we have those numbers, so let's do it this year and do it different. Some will say, okay, let's figure out 2 or 3 different scenarios, and you have group A, group B, group C. How are you actually doing the testing?
So we're going to have 2 groups. we have 2 batches that are coming in on the same date, and they're being trained in the same line of business, which in this case is email. So what the test will be is to split the training in half, and group A will get the 1 week, 1 week production, 1 week back in, and then off they go. And then batch B will get the 2 solid weeks of training, and then off they go. What we're looking to find out is the shorter amount of training speeding up agents, getting them efficient and independent quicker, or is it a stress to the system in any way? Like I said, I think we know what's going to happen. We've surveyed the agents, and pretty much they all think that 2 weeks is a really long time. Gets a little bit, weighty, and they want to get their hands in the system, right? And try some stuff out and get confident in some things. So I think that's probably going to win, but I'm open-minded. I'll let the numbers show me which way to go.
I think for me, what you're describing there is also the need to be in an organization that allows you to do that type of testing. Because there are certain cultures that have essentially a, zero error, type of, thought process. And, if you can't test when you're in that type of environment. So what kind of support is your senior level leaders giving you? I mean, yes, I know you're part of that senior level staff, but when you start talking amongst your peers at that C level, what do they share from a culture perspective in regards to learning and doing testing?
Culturally, we have to test and learn, but also culturally, we have to fix our mistakes quickly. So like if after 1 week, I see this is not working, this team, their quality scores aren't good, or, they're making a lot of mistakes on their records, I will scale it back so fast. I don't have time to waste. So I think the senior leaders trust me in that they know if I realize that there's a mistake or we're going down the wrong path, that I'll pull it back really quick. Regardless, there's no ego involved here.
Well, that's good to be part of that. Okay, so now we also talked about the existing staff. We talked about the peak season. We talked about the planning last year. Are you actually going back to 2019? What are the differences for this year? So when you think about workforce management and capacity planning, what's different this year?
I think a couple of things are different. So last year, we benefited pretty significantly from having so much e-commerce activity. People weren't really going to the stores, so e-commerce was really heavy. Now people are back in the stores, but our product has evolved in that they can take their virtual Visa card and go into a store or shop online. Doesn't make any difference. So the theory is that should not negatively impact our volume. In fact, our volume each quarter has been higher and higher over Q4 of last year. So we are on track for much higher volume. And so we're using those numbers to try and predict what we're going to need. Fortunately, our contact ratio has continued to drop because we've learned and we've fixed things along the way. So even if we take the most aggressive contact ratio and try to extrapolate out from there, we're not going to be, it's not going to be perfect, but it should be pretty close.
And for those who may not be familiar with that terminology, what do you mean by contact ratio?
How many, so for example, for every 1,000 orders we have, how many of those customers will contact us? That is what we consider our contact ratio. So, right now we're sitting at a pretty high number. The goal is much lower. So we're going to pick a number in the middle to use. So for example, let's say 7% we're going to use to extrapolate towards the end of the year to see what our contact ratio should be. And that will help us determine how many agents we need.
Okay, so another thing you talk about is pressure testing all of this. What is that?
Okay, so a couple of things. The agents will be going back on site, some of them will continue to work at home. And when I say pressure test, I want to see the agents successfully transition back to a 5-day a week, 5 days per week in the office, and see what that feels like. Do I have higher attrition? Do I have higher absenteeism because they're used to working from home? Do they not want to come back to the site? Like, these are things that will really impact us. And if we don't test that in August and September, in October, we could be in for a rude awakening. We could be, suffering through a lot of attrition. And at that point, if that happens, we're really close to peak. it's close, like it's coming next month.
Well, one of the things I hear, from a lot of organizations, is the challenges that they're currently experiencing in hiring, skilled personnel that are, or I should say, have the aptitude and the ability to take, what you're providing from a training perspective and, be proficient, out the gate.
Mhm.
What kind of issues are you guys struggling with in that area, and how are you overcoming them?
One other thing that we're going to do, which I did last year, but it wasn't 100% correct, is I'm going to refine our job description. Things have changed significantly, and the agents that we were able to attract and retain last year are not necessarily in the market. So I'm going to need to look, okay, am I hiring a voice agent? Am I hiring a strictly back office agent? And that needs to be made clear upfront. One thing we did learn is that when an agent is hired for example, email, and they suddenly need to transition into voice, it doesn't usually work. The agents don't typically like voice, and that's why they apply for a written job. So these are some of the things that will wrap up into our overall profile. Like if you're hired for voice, you're doing voice. If you're hired for email or chat, that's what you're doing. That is a big lesson from last year.
Lauren Volpe, always providing all of us a lot of very valuable lessons, and thank you for doing so. Again, how do the CX Quick Tip listeners get in touch with you, Lauren?
You can reach me on LinkedIn, Lauren Quinn Volpe, or Twitter. I'm at Volpster.
And Lauren is also a frequent contributor to CX Global Media and the CX Quick Tips. Lauren, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.